wanted to give a little bit of an introduction to what LFJL, the organization I represent, does and what we've been doing on the ground. We're an organization that promotes human rights and the rule of law in Libya, and as part of that we have a constitutional program which is called Dasturi, which in Arabic means my constitution. And the intention behind that program was to create a sense of ownership in the Libyan constitution by engaging directly with the stakeholders. And by stakeholders, we definitely don't mean people in five-star hotels in Tripoli and in big offices in Tripoli and Benghazi, but actually the Libyan population. So as part of that, we had a 6-week tour of the country. We stopped at 38 communities, 25 of which we were the first visitors post-conflict to, whether it was official or non-official visitors. And we spoke with over 3,000 people about what they wanted for their constitution. Before I give you what we took away from that, I thought it might be useful to just show you a 1.5-minute, 2-minute clip of some of the discussions we had about the role of the police and army in the future constitution. And we do that in an indirect way of what we call games, so you'll see people playing whilst they express their concerns, and hopefully it will make it a bit more interesting than just listening to me talk about it.
الشرطة شنو وظيفتها؟ تنفيذ الأحكام داخل الدولة. لازم تكون تحت السلطة التنفيذية.
لازم تبيع الأمان. مهمة الدولة دور قوي الجيش.
شنو هو دور الجيش؟
وزارة الدفاع شو تخصصها في الدولة أو في العالم أو في التكوين؟ حماية الحدود.
الدولة تكون
بعد الدستور طبعا عنده دستور وعنده قانون يمشي به، صح ولا؟
ممكن يستغلها ويقمع بها الشعب.
ويحط الجيش أعلى واحد لكن يكون مستقل.
هم الأولين، الشرطة الأولى.
مين اللي يعين رئيس الأركان؟
كل الشعب يعني.
لا مش الشعب، مش حنعينوه الشعب. مين اللي السلطة التنفيذية؟
ومن بيقوم بواجب هذا كله مين بيقوم به؟
الجيش والشرطة. هذا يأمن البلاد والحدود، فهمت؟ وهذا مأمن
هذا بعد السلطة التنفيذية.
الشرطة تنظيم داخل البلد أكثر يعني.
ضامن عندي كمواطن ليبي إن الجيش هذا إياهي ياسين نقول بعد 5 سنوات 10 سنوات إن يدير لي انقلاب.
لو احنا في وضع سلام وامان في البلاد، هل نشوفوا الجيش كمواطنين يبان لنا؟ وين كان الجيش؟ وين يكون؟
كانت مواقع.
ما نشوفوش لبس هذا بكل في الشوارع ولا؟
نبي امان، نبي حريه، نبي شرطه، جيش، قانون.
من اللي قرر دور الجيش والشرطه في ليبيا؟ انت اللي تقرر. اختار من يكتب دستورك الجديد بعنايه، دستورك يقرر مصيرنا. صوت بمسؤوليه.
We turned the video into a mini clip to encourage people to vote responsibly, like it says at the end, in selecting their committee, the Constitutional Drafting Assembly. And that brings me very neatly to what I want to talk about, whether the Constitutional Drafting Committee does indeed have any legitimacy in Libya, or if it doesn't, what challenges it faces and what the prospects are for it undergoing this task. And if I can phrase that, then I think one of the problems we have in Libya at the moment is that the constitution is seen as a solution to all our ills. If we have a constitution, somehow the utopia will follow. And I think that's a really dangerous myth we're selling ourselves. A constitution at best can be a tool, but it can never be the solution. And I think that's why the process is absolutely vital. And what we learned from our tour and from our work continuing on this process is actually the process is exceptionally flawed at the moment. So the elections, then if you look at just pure numbers, 1.1 million registered to vote. That's about a third of those who registered for the GNC elections, the parliamentary elections in 2012. Of those, only 45% voted. So we have less than 500,000 people voting for the Constituent Drafting Assembly. In addition, we have, out of the 60 seats in the Constitution Drafting Assembly, 13 haven't been filled yet. Crucially, out of the 13 are the minority representation seats, the saved seats for the Tabu and the Amazigh minority. And we also have a very arbitrary selection of women. We only have 6 women, 6 seats were designated for women, and they were specified in certain areas, so not all regions have a woman representing them on the drafting. So not everyone, or indeed, if you look at it really, the drafting table in Libya consists primarily of middle-aged men from big cities. The other problem we have is the trust in the rule of law in general in Libya, and everyone hoping again that the constitution will solve this problem. But if you look at the way the Constitutional Declaration, which is our interim constitution since the revolution, has been used, it's actually been used politically to further certain objectives. So our constitution itself was amended to allow for the political isolation law to be passed with a lower majority than was previously in it. The constitution was amended 7 times in 2 years to deal with what was needed on the ground to further, if you like, the political agenda, which is a very dangerous precedent to be setting when you're about to start drafting a constitution, that it's infinitely amendable and that it's adaptable to that degree on a literally daily basis in Libya. And I think it also reflects this approach to lawmaking in general. Whenever we criticize or question the drafters on their laws, the answer we always hear is like, let's just get this done and we can amend later, or we'll deal with it later. And if you're in a situation where you're trying to enshrine the rule of law in a country, knowing that the law is always movable is a very difficult task. I talked briefly about inclusiveness. The other element as well that's a problem for the legitimacy of this constitutional process is that there seem to be some predetermined elements in it. So we've already had a decree by the GNC stating that Sharia will not be up for consideration in the drafting process. It will be the primary source of law. And we've also had indirectly a new election law, which is envisaging the upcoming elections this summer, and actually it changes the form of government again, which creates a precedent, at least for when we come to talk about the constitution, what kind of form of government we're looking at. So it's removed the ability to run under a party ticket, for example. You can only run as an independent. And the final element, I guess, is the suggestion in the February committee, which is the committee that the GNC selected to come up with recommendations for constitutional amendments, of stating that we need to have a presidential election in this period as well. Again, that's predetermining the conversation about form of government before we actually have the debate with the constitution itself. So we've enshrined the source of law. Indirectly, we've enshrined the source of the form of government before we've even really finished appointing all our drafters. All this leads to some key challenges. The biggest one we obviously see is buy-in. It's very difficult to see the population, given these circumstances and how little of them physically took part in this, to see it as something that represents them. And the essential part of a constitution is the ownership. The model we always talk about of a successful constitution is South Africa. And South Africa, as a process, worked because of the engagement genuinely by the drafters at a grassroots level over an extended period of time. Unfortunately, in Libya, for self-inflicted reasons, we don't have that option. We've given ourselves 120 days to draft our constitution from the date of the first meeting of the drafting assembly. They've declared that they're proposing to have their first meeting on the 14th of April, which is next week. This means the clock starts on the 14th of April for 120 days, despite the fact that the minorities are still not at the table. And, over 20% of the population isn't represented at the table because those seats haven't been filled yet. There's also the feasibility of this. I talked about it in terms of the time frame given, but also we seem to be prioritizing expediency over effectiveness in terms of the document we produce. The important thing is getting it done, as opposed to what you're getting done. And I think for us, the really fundamental part is the process. It really is potentially a genuine, and I think maybe that's the point I really want to make, there's a genuine potential for the process of drafting the constitution to address a lot of the issues of transitional justice that Libyans are talking about. If you can have people at the drafting table discussing reconciliation, discussing the differences, bringing the minorities, not only ethnically, but political minorities, religious minorities, the youth is very ill-represented in this, into the actual drafting room, then you might have a situation where your constitution not only produces a document that no one feels represents them, but actually might result in some kind of national dialogue in its own right that might resolve some of our concerns, because if the final document feels like it represents more people, then it's more likely to be resilient. And we won't go down the path of somewhere like Egypt where you have 3 constitutions. And I think that's the danger, because in Libya you hear this, drafters saying to us, it's fine. Look, if it doesn't work, we'll just have another one. And that's a really dangerous attitude to go in with. And then the final thing is, obviously none of this is possible if and I'm sure this is what you'll touch on, the underlying security situation in Libya is not addressed. We have a very unstable government. We just had our 2-week interim prime minister now confirmed to be the prime minister going forward. He's the ex-minister of defense, so a potential criticism of that is that we've had a stealth coup where we've had our minister of defense appointed instead of him taking over a la Sisi in Egypt. And there's also a genuine risk. In Libya, there's been on average one judge or lawyer assassinated per month for the last year. The drafters of this constitution are putting their lives at risk, and very little is being done genuinely by the officials to tell us how they're going to be protected. What's being prioritized, again, is getting this piece of paper finished instead of ensuring that it's done in a thorough way. I will stop there because I'm conscious of time, and I have a lot to say, so please ask lots of questions. But I want to finish with another short video. This one is one so all our videos have been aired by Libyan television quite regularly. This is the one that no one wanted to show. It's something that makes it extra special for me. It's Libyans discussing Sharia, and before I show it, I just want to give a bit of context. So in Libya, whether you're a so-called secularist or liberal politician or you're an Islamist politician, Sharia has to be the focal point of your conversation when it comes to legislating. No one is suggesting the option of potentially lowering the role of Sharia beyond it being a primary source of legislation. And they tell us that that's because we're all Libyan and that's what everyone in Libya really wants. On our tour, what was incredibly, just educational really for us is when people were filling in the written surveys, sweepingly, Sharia source of law. When we did the games, over 50% removed the word altogether in the game, or put it below international law, or put it below customary law, because we asked them to rank the sources of law, because they didn't feel like they were being assessed or watched, and so they actually had a conversation. And it's really dangerous for me that conversation has been bullied out of the process by our GNC by removing it from the table of conversation. And unfortunately, none of the TV stations, whether they're public or private, were willing to reopen the conversation by showing this video. So in a friendly audience, we'll show it.
الشريعة حتكون مصدر وحيد ولا مصدر رئيسي؟
أنا بالنسبة لي أهم في ليبيا الشريعة هي الأساس.
الشريعة مصدر مركزية في الدولة، هي مركزية الحكومة بأكملها.
القانون الدولي أول شيء، بعدين الشريعة. حاليا تونس بدأت بالربيع العربي وعملوا الدستور المؤقت حاليا، الغوا كلمة الشريعة. لأن أصلا منطقيا اوتوماتيكيا أن بتكون الشريعة مستمدة، القوانين في تونس بتكون مستمدة من الشريعة الإسلامية.
بما لا يعارض الشريعة ما أنا بتحطه معنا.
أيوة. الشريعة أولا ثم الدستور.
يعني في رأيي الشريعة بعد هيجي القانون الدولي.
الدستور هم لما بياخذوه بيضعوا الدستور، بيضعوا على شنو؟ بيضعوا من القرآن.
ما القرآن طبقا لتفسير من؟
الشريعة الإسلامية وفقا لما هو موجود في مذهب الإمام مالك، أو نزيد إلى ذلك أن نأخذ بأيسر المذاهب.
يعني الأوقاف تابعة
الإدارة الإفتاء تكون تابعة للأوقاف.
لو نجيو لإدارة الإفتاء هي بالطبع بتكون شاملة
القبضية المالكية صح المالكية.
القوانين هي ضروري تمر على الإفتاء، لأن أحيانا تكون القوانين هي ما تمشاش احنا مع بلادنا مع الدين الإسلامي.
لو في خلاف بيناتهم في الرأي، من رأي اللي يمشي؟
هو الإفتاء رأيها ملزم على الدولة.
لا السلطة المنتخبة لا المنتخبة لا
دار الافتاء راي علماء يا راجل، هذول الناس في دار الافتاء خير.
الدولة بروحها يعني تبي تاخذ الرأي كويس، ما تبي استشاري.
دار الافتاء عينتها مثال السلطة التشريعية بتبدأ تخدم لصالحها.
احنا نمشي بنفس النظام اللي في إيران مثلا، المفتي أعلى من رئيس الجمهورية.
لكن من يفصل في الخطأ؟ هل هو دستوري ولا غير دستوري؟ احنا عندنا دستور. القضاء
خارج الدستور، ما فيش حاجة خارج الدستور.
من يحكم الشريعة في الدستور؟ من يحدد دور الشريعة في الدستور؟ أنت اللي تقرر. اختار من يكتب دستورك الجديد بعناية، دستورك يقرر مصيرنا. صوت بمسؤولية.